My name is Claire, 34 years old, and I was lying in that sterile ICU bed at Memorial Hospital when the doctor delivered the news that should have destroyed me. 5 days. That's all I had left. The machines beeped steadily around me as my husband Mark gripped my hand. But instead of tears or devastation, I watched his lips curl into the smallest smile. He leaned close to my ear and whispered 5 words that made my blood freeze. Finally, we can be free. Before I tell you what happened next, and how those 5 words would ultimately seal his fate forever, let me know where you're watching from today. Please hit that subscribe button if you want to hear how I discovered the terrifying truth behind my husband's joy at my death sentence. This story will change how you look at the person sleeping beside you tonight. 6 months before that horrible moment in the ICU, my life appeared perfect to anyone looking from the outside. Mark and I lived in a beautiful colonial home in Westport, Connecticut, complete with the white picket fence and 2-car garage that held his BMW and my Range Rover. We'd been married for 12 years, and everyone called us the Golden Couple. Mark worked as an investment banker at one of Manhattan's most prestigious firms, while I ran my own interior design business that had just been featured in Architectural Digest. The changes started so subtly that I almost missed them. Mark began working late more frequently, texting me around 7 or 8 that deals were running long and not to wait up for dinner. He joined a new gym downtown instead of using our home equipment, claiming he needed the motivation of other people working out around him. There was new cologne on his dresser, something expensive and unfamiliar that he said a client had given him as a gift. I remember the exact moment when the first real warning bell went off in my mind. We were hosting a dinner party for Mark's colleagues in early March. I was refreshing drinks in the kitchen when I overheard Mark's boss, Richard, congratulating him on getting his life insurance increase approved. The way Richard said it struck me as odd, with this knowing tone that made my stomach turn slightly. When I asked Mark about it later, he brushed it off, saying it was just standard financial planning now that my business was taking off. Then came the receipts. I found one crumpled in his jacket pocket when I was taking clothes to the dry cleaner. It was from Cartier, dated 2 weeks prior, for a diamond necklace that cost $8,000. I had never received any necklace. When I confronted Mark, he claimed it was for his secretary's retirement gift from the entire office, and he'd been in charge of purchasing it. But his secretary, Linda, was only 52 and showed no signs of retiring. There was also the perfume. Not cologne, but women's perfume that lingered in his car when I borrowed it one day when mine was in the shop. It was floral and young, nothing like the classic scents I preferred. Mark said he'd given a colleague's wife a ride home from a company event. The explanation was reasonable, but the way he delivered it too quickly and with too much detail made me wonder. My health issues began in April. At first, it was just fatigue that I attributed to landing the biggest client of my career, a tech billionaire who wanted his entire estate redesigned. I was working 18-hour days, so exhaustion seemed natural. But then came the dizziness. I was in the middle of presenting fabric samples to my client when the room started spinning. I gripped the table to steady myself, and my assistant Catherine had to take over the presentation while I excused myself to the bathroom. Mark's concern seemed genuine at first. He insisted I see a doctor immediately, but not just any doctor. He had already researched and found Dr. Harrison a specialist in rare blood disorders. I thought it was odd that he'd already been looking into medical specialists before I'd even agreed to see anyone, but Mark said he'd noticed I'd been tired lately and wanted to be prepared. That should have been my second warning. Dr. Harrison's office was in a medical building 40 minutes from our home, despite there being dozens of qualified doctors closer. Mark drove me to that first appointment, insisting on coming into the examination room with me. Dr. Harrison ran what seemed like an excessive battery of tests, drawing so many vials of blood that I felt lightheaded afterward. Mark held my hand through it all, the devoted husband. The diagnosis came a week later. Dr. Harrison called us both into his office, his face grave. A rare blood disorder, he said, something called acute hemolytic dysplasia. I'd never heard of it, but Mark seemed to already understand what it meant. He asked specific questions about treatment options and prognosis. while I sat there in shock trying to process that my body was betraying me at 34 years old. The treatment plan Dr. Harrison proposed was aggressive and experimental. It would require daily medications, weekly injections, and monthly hospitalizations for transfusions. The side effects would be severe, he warned, including extreme fatigue, nausea, and possible organ damage. But without treatment, he said I had perhaps 6 months. With treatment, we could potentially extend that to years. What struck me as strange was how quickly Mark produced insurance paperwork he just happened to have ready. He'd already called our insurance company, he said, to make sure everything would be covered. The forms were filled out, waiting only for my signature. He'd even found a private nurse who could come to the house to administer the daily injections, saving me the trouble of traveling to a clinic. The nurse's name was Jennifer. She was 28 with long auburn hair and the kind of figure that made men turn their heads on the street. Mark had interviewed her personally, he said, wanting to make sure she was the best. She would start the following Monday, coming to our house every evening at 6 to administer my medications. The treatment began, and immediately I felt worse than before. The medications made me violently ill, and the injections left me so weak I could barely get out of bed. Mark was attentive, bringing me soup and sitting by my bedside, but I noticed he always seemed to be texting someone. When I asked who, he said it was just work deals that couldn't wait, even though his wife was sick. By May, I was spending most of my time in bed. Jennifer came every evening, and I noticed she started staying later and later. Sometimes I would hear her and Mark talking downstairs after my injection, their voices low and intimate. When I mentioned it, Mark said Jennifer was just updating him on my condition and discussing adjustments to my treatment plan. My best friend Sarah came to visit one afternoon when Mark was at work. She sat on the edge of my bed holding my hand, and I could see the concern written across her face. "Claire," she said, "something doesn't feel right about all this." The way she said it made me pay attention. Sarah had always had good instincts about people. She told me she'd seen Mark at a restaurant downtown the previous week when he was supposedly in Boston for business. He was with Jennifer, and they were sitting on the same side of the booth, their heads close together. When Sarah approached to say hello, Mark had looked panicked before recovering and claiming they were discussing my treatment options over lunch. I wanted to confront Mark, but I was so weak by then that even raising my voice exhausted me. When I tried to bring it up, he immediately turned it around, saying the medications were making me paranoid and that I needed to trust him to take care of me. He said Sarah was probably mistaken, that it must have been someone who looked like him. But Sarah had been my friend for 20 years. She wouldn't make that kind of mistake. I started paying closer attention despite the fog of medications. I noticed Mark had been reorganizing our finances, moving money between accounts. When I asked about it, he said he was just making sure everything was in order in case I needed more extensive treatment. He'd also changed the combination to our safe without telling me. When I asked for the new combination, he said he'd written it down somewhere and would give it to me later. He never did. The phone calls were another red flag. Mark would receive calls at odd hours and always step into the garage to take them. I could hear his muffled voice through the walls, urgent and sometimes angry, but I could never make out the words. When he came back inside, he'd say it was work crisis, always some deal going south that needed his immediate attention. One night in early June, I woke up to find Mark wasn't in bed. It was 3 a.m. I could hear voices downstairs, and when I slowly made my way to the landing, I saw Jennifer's car in our driveway through the window. They were in the kitchen, and I heard Jennifer say something about being patient, that it wouldn't be much longer. Mark responded that he was tired of waiting, that everything was taking too long. The next morning, I asked Mark why Jennifer had been at our house in the middle of the night. He looked at me with such concern, touched my forehead, as if checking for fever, and said I must have been dreaming. The medications could cause hallucinations, he said. But I knew what I'd seen. Jennifer's red Honda Civic in our driveway was not a hallucination. I tried to request my medical records from Dr. Harrison's office, calling while Mark was at work. The receptionist said she'd have to check with the doctor and would call me back. She never did. When I called again, I was told that all medical records requests had to go through my healthcare proxy, which was Mark. I didn't remember making him my healthcare proxy. I attempted to get a second opinion, secretly making an appointment with another doctor. But somehow Mark found out. He intercepted me as I was trying to leave the house, my car keys in my shaking hand. He guided me back to bed, saying I was confused and putting myself in danger. He called Dr. Harrison, who increased my medications, saying my paranoia was a sign the disease was affecting my brain. Then came the lawyer. Mark brought an estate attorney to our house, saying we needed to make sure all our affairs were in order. The lawyer, a thin man with cold eyes, presented me with dozens of documents to sign. Power of attorney forms, healthcare directives, changes to my will. Mark held my hand as I signed, my signature shaky and barely recognizable. I was too weak to read everything carefully, trusting Mark when he said it was all standard. My world became smaller and smaller. Mark started limiting my visitors, claiming I needed rest and that too much stimulation was bad for my condition. Sarah was turned away at the door more than once, Mark telling her I was sleeping or having a bad day. My parents, who lived in Florida, were told not to come visit yet, that their presence would be too emotionally taxing for me. Catherine, my assistant, tried to keep my business running, but Mark told her to cancel all my remaining projects. He said I needed to focus on my health, not work. My clients were told I was taking an indefinite medical leave. The tech billionaire, whose estate I was supposed to redesign, sent flowers and a get well card, but Mark intercepted them. I only found out because Catherine managed to text me when Mark was in the shower. Jennifer's presence in our house became constant. She started arriving earlier and staying later, sometimes being there when I woke up in the morning. Mark said it was because my condition was deteriorating and I needed round-the-clock care. But I would hear them laughing together downstairs, the clink of wine glasses when they thought I was asleep. One evening I pretended to be unconscious after my injection and heard them talking in my bedroom. Jennifer was saying something about Bermuda, about a house on the beach. Mark responded that it would all be worth it soon, that they just had to be patient a little longer. He mentioned a number 2 million and something about double indemnity. That's when the final piece clicked into place in my medication-foggy mind. Mark was poisoning me. The emergency hospitalization happened on a humid Tuesday in late June. Mark had left for what he said was a critical 3-day business trip to Chicago. Jennifer was supposed to come that evening for my injection, but I'd been vomiting all morning, unable to keep even water down. My neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, found me collapsed on the bathroom floor when she came to check on me after not seeing me for weeks. The paramedics arrived within minutes, and in my semi-conscious state, I heard them debating which hospital to take me to. Mark had left instructions for a specific hospital, but the paramedics decided I was too unstable and took me to the nearest emergency room at Riverside General. That decision saved my life. Dr. Martinez was the emergency physician on duty. Unlike Dr. Harrison, she asked detailed questions about my symptoms and medical history. When I weakly mentioned I'd been seeing a specialist for a rare blood disorder, she frowned and ordered immediate blood work. Not just the standard panels, but comprehensive toxicology screens that Dr. Harrison had never performed. The results came back within hours. Dr. Martinez entered my room with a security guard and a police officer. Her face was grave as she explained that my blood showed toxic levels of ethylene glycol and ricin substances that had absolutely no place in any legitimate medical treatment. Someone had been systematically poisoning me for months. The police officer, Detective Walsh, asked if I knew who might want to harm me. Through my tears and shock, I managed to tell him about Mark, about Jennifer, about the insurance policies and the overheard conversations. Detective Walsh took notes while Dr. Martinez started immediate treatment to flush the toxins from my system. Mark arrived at the hospital the next morning, having cut his trip short when the hospital called him. His face when he walked into my room and saw the police was something I'll never forget. The color drained from his skin, but he quickly recovered, rushing to my bedside with perfectly performed concern. He demanded to know why I was at Riverside instead of his chosen hospital. He insisted I needed to be transferred immediately to continue my treatment with Dr. Harrison. When Dr. Martinez explained about the poisoning, Mark's performance was Oscar-worthy. Shock, disbelief, anger at the suggestion he could be involved. He even managed to squeeze out a few tears. But then Dr. Harrison arrived. Mark had called him insisting he come consult on my case. What Mark didn't know was that the police had already visited Dr. Harrison's office and discovered he was being paid substantial amounts by Mark outside of insurance billing. Harrison, trying to save himself, had agreed to cooperate with the investigation. It was Dr. Harrison who delivered the final blow to Mark's charade. Standing at the foot of my hospital bed with police recording everything, he looked at Mark and said the words that revealed everything. According to the timeline we discussed, Mr. Thompson, your wife has approximately 5 days left if the current dosage continues. Mark's reaction gave him away completely. For just a moment his mask slipped and I saw pure satisfaction cross his face. He squeezed my hand and smiled that horrible smile I'll never forget, and whispered those 5 words that he thought only I could hear. Finally, we can be free. What Mark didn't know was that Detective Walsh had already placed a recording device under my hospital bed. Every word was captured crystal clear. But the detective wanted more evidence, so he signaled for me to play along. I let my eyes flutter closed, pretending to slip into unconsciousness. Jennifer arrived an hour later, dressed not in her nurse's uniform, but in a designer sundress and heels. She thought I was dying that their plan was working. She walked right past the plainclothes officer in the corner and went straight to Mark, wrapping her arms around him. I kept my eyes closed as they talked, their voices growing more confident as they believed I couldn't hear them. Jennifer mentioned the house in Bermuda again, how the down payment was already made. Mark told her about the insurance policies, $2 million on my life with double indemnity for accidental death, which poisoning would qualify as if they were never caught. Mark actually pulled out his phone and showed Jennifer photos of the beach house, describing where they would put their bed, how they would watch sunsets from the master suite balcony. He talked about the investment firm he planned to start there using my life insurance money as seed capital. They even discussed what they would tell people, how Mark would play the grieving widower for a year before publicly moving on with his late wife's devoted nurse. Detective Walsh had heard enough. He stepped forward, badge displayed, and the look of terror on both their faces was something I'll never forget. Jennifer immediately tried to run, but the plainclothes officer blocked the door. Mark attempted to bluster his way out, claiming it was all a misunderstanding, but the recording was damning. As they were both handcuffed, I opened my eyes and looked directly at Mark. The shock on his face when he realized I'd been conscious the entire time was complete. I managed to find my voice weak but clear. Those words you whispered, Mark, they did seal someone's fate. Just not mine. The next few days were a blur of police interviews and medical treatments. As the real doctors at Riverside worked to flush the poisons from my system, the full extent of Mark's plan came to light. Jennifer, it turned out, wasn't even a real nurse. She had fake credentials that Mark had paid someone to create. She was actually a waitress he'd met at a bar 6 months ago, and they'd been having an affair ever since. The investigation revealed that Mark had been planning this for over a year. He'd researched rare blood disorders, extensively choosing one that had symptoms similar to poisoning. He'd found Dr. Harrison, a once legitimate doctor who'd lost his license for overprescribing opioids and was practicing illegally. Mark paid him $50,000 to play along with the diagnosis and treatment plan. The poisoning had been methodical and deliberate. The medications Dr. Harrison prescribed were real medications, but for conditions I didn't have medications that would make me sick when combined. The nightly injections Jennifer administered contained small doses of ethylene glycol, the active ingredient in antifreeze and ricin, which she extracted from castor beans she grew in her apartment. The plan was to slowly increase the doses until my organs failed, making it look like complications from my supposed blood disorder. They were so close to succeeding. If Mrs. Patterson hadn't found me, if the paramedics had taken me to Mark's chosen hospital, where another bought doctor was waiting, I would have been dead within days. Detective Walsh uncovered even more evidence as the investigation continued. Mark had taken out the life insurance policies gradually over 2 years with different companies, so it wouldn't raise red flags. He'd been moving money to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, and had already put the deposit on the Bermuda house under a shell company name. Jennifer, when faced with life in prison, quickly turned on Mark. She provided the police with text messages, emails, and recorded phone calls that detailed every aspect of their plan. She told them about the practice runs they'd done testing different dosages on mice Jennifer bought from a pet store. She revealed how Mark had coached her on exactly what to say to me, how to act caring while slowly murdering me. The police also discovered this wasn't Jennifer's first time. She'd been involved with an elderly man in Pennsylvania 3 years earlier who died under suspicious circumstances, leaving her a substantial inheritance. The death had been ruled natural causes, but the police there were now reopening the case. My recovery was slow and painful. The poisons had damaged my liver and kidneys, though not irreversibly. Dr. Martinez explained that if the poisoning had continued for even another week, the damage would have been permanent, and I likely would have died. The real treatment for poisoning was far different from what I'd been enduring, involving chelation therapy and careful monitoring of my organ function. Sarah never left my side during those first critical days. She'd suspected something was wrong from the beginning, but hadn't known how to prove it. She told me she'd actually hired a private investigator to follow Mark, which is how she'd known about the restaurant meeting with Jennifer. The investigator had photos of them kissing in Mark's car, entering hotels together, and shopping for jewelry that I never received. My parents flew up from Florida immediately, and the guilt on their faces broke my heart. Mark had been calling them regularly, telling them I was too sick for visitors, and that seeing them would upset me. He'd painted a picture of me as mentally unstable from the medications, paranoid and aggressive. They'd believed him because he was so convincing, so seemingly devoted. Even Catherine, my assistant, had been manipulated. Mark had told her I was embarrassed about my appearance due to the illness and didn't want anyone from work to see me. He'd suggested she find another job since I wouldn't be returning to work, and he'd even written her a glowing recommendation letter supposedly from me. The media got hold of the story, and suddenly my hospital room was surrounded by reporters. The headlines were sensational. Investment banker attempts to murder wife for insurance money. Fake nurse and lover helped plan elaborate poisoning scheme. My face, pale and gaunt from months of poisoning, was on every news channel. Mark's company immediately fired him and issued a statement distancing themselves from his actions. His colleagues came forward with stories of his callous comments about my illness, how he'd seemed almost cheerful when discussing my declining health. Richard, his boss, admitted he'd found Mark's interest in insurance policies odd, but hadn't thought it was criminal. The trial date was set for October, and I had to find the strength to testify. The prosecution wanted me to tell my story in detail to help the jury understand the psychological torture along with the physical poisoning. They needed them to see Mark not just as a would-be murderer, but as someone who'd violated the most sacred trust between spouses. The legal proceedings began even before I was released from the hospital. My divorce attorney, recommended by Detective Walsh, was a fierce woman named Margaret Stone, who'd handled cases involving domestic violence and attempted murder before. She arrived at my bedside with a briefcase full of documents and a determination that reminded me I could be strong too. Filing for divorce while Mark sat in jail awaiting trial felt surreal. 12 years of marriage reduced to paperwork and asset division. But as Margaret investigated our finances, she uncovered more of Mark's deceptions. He'd been siphoning money from my business accounts, small amounts over time that added up to hundreds of thousands of dollars. He'd remortgaged our house without my knowledge, forging my signature on the documents. The offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands contained nearly $1 million, all stolen from our joint assets and my business. Mark had been planning his new life for years, long before he'd met Jennifer. She was just the latest accomplice in what appeared to be a pattern of calculated financial crimes throughout our marriage. Jennifer's lawyer reached out to mine, offering her full cooperation in exchange for a plea deal. She would testify against Mark, providing every detail of their relationship and the murder plot. In her deposition, which I attended despite my lawyer's suggestion to stay away, Jennifer revealed things that made my skin crawl. Mark had told her I was frigid, that our marriage had been dead for years. He'd said I was mentally unstable, that I'd threatened to kill myself and frame him for it if he left me. He'd painted himself as the victim trapped in a marriage with a crazy woman who controlled all the money. Jennifer claimed she'd believed him at first, that she'd thought she was helping him escape an abusive situation. But then she'd met me, seen how weak and trusting I was, and realized Mark had lied about everything. She admitted she'd continued with the plan anyway because she'd fallen for the promise of wealth and a new life. She'd never felt guilt, she said, until she saw me lying in that hospital bed and realized I was a real person, not just an obstacle to her happiness. The trial was set to begin in January, giving me time to recover physically and prepare emotionally. Dr. Martinez had become not just my physician, but my friend, checking on me even after I was released from the hospital. She testified in the divorce proceedings that my medical expenses, both from the poisoning and the recovery, would be substantial and ongoing. Margaret used this to argue for a favorable divorce settlement. Despite Mark's attempts to hide assets, she tracked down every penny. The house, the cars, the investment accounts, my business that Mark had tried to destroy, everything was cataloged and valued. The judge, horrified by the circumstances, awarded me 90% of all marital assets, leaving Mark with barely enough to pay for his defense attorney. My business, which I'd thought was destroyed, slowly came back to life. Catherine had kept all my client files and project plans, hoping I would recover. The tech billionaire whose estate I was supposed to redesign reached out personally, offering to wait as long as necessary for me to be ready to work again. Other clients followed suit, and the publicity from the case actually brought in new clients who admired my strength. The trial itself was a media circus. Court TV wanted to broadcast it live, and reporters from around the world requested interviews. I declined them all on Margaret's advice, wanting to maintain my dignity through the proceedings. But I attended every single day of the trial, sitting in the front row where Mark could see me. His defense attorney tried to argue that Mark had been manipulated by Jennifer, that she was the mastermind who'd preyed on a husband concerned about his sick wife. They painted her as a black widow who'd done this before, suggesting Mark was another one of her victims. But the evidence was overwhelmingly against him. The prosecution presented the text messages between Mark and Jennifer, including ones from before I'd ever gotten sick, where Mark discussed different ways to kill me and make it look natural. They showed the jury the receipts for the castor beans Jennifer had purchased on Mark's credit card, the books about poisons he'd bought online, the searches on his computer for undetectable murder methods. Dr. Harrison testified against Mark as part of his own plea deal. He revealed how Mark had sought him out specifically because of his lost license and desperation for money. Mark had researched doctors with questionable ethics, finding Dr. Harrison through underground medical forums. The $50,000 Mark paid him was just the beginning. There were promises of more money once I was dead, and the insurance paid out. My testimony was the hardest part. I had to relive every moment of those horrible months, describing the physical pain of the poisoning and the emotional agony of realizing the man I'd loved was trying to kill me. I told the jury about the nights I'd lain awake, wondering if I was going crazy, doubting my own instincts, because I couldn't believe Mark could do something so evil. I described the isolation, how Mark had cut me off from everyone who cared about me, making me completely dependent on him and Jennifer. I talked about signing documents I couldn't read, because my vision was blurred from the poisoning, trusting Mark to take care of me while he was orchestrating my death. The prosecutor asked me about the moment in the hospital when Mark whispered those 5 words. I looked directly at him as I repeated them to the jury. Finally, we can be free. The temperature in the courtroom seemed to drop as everyone absorbed the cruelty of those words, the joy in his voice at my impending death. Mark's parents, whom I'd loved like my own, sat in the back of the courtroom every day. They'd initially believed their son was innocent, but as the evidence mounted, I watched them slowly crumble. His mother stopped making eye contact with him. His father, a retired minister, left the courtroom in tears when the poison purchases were detailed. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. Attempted murder in the first-degree conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, forgery, and a dozen other charges. The judge sentenced Mark to 25 years to life, with no possibility of parole for at least 20 years. As they led him away in handcuffs, he looked at me one last time. There was no remorse in his eyes, only rage that his plan had failed. Jennifer received 10 years as part of her plea deal, with possibility of parole in 7. She was also ordered to pay restitution, though she had no money to speak of. As she was led away, she mouthed, "I'm sorry to me." I didn't acknowledge it. Her apology meant nothing after what she'd done. The months following the trial were dedicated to rebuilding everything Mark had tried to destroy. My health improved gradually under Dr. Martinez's care. The organ damage wasn't permanent, but I would need monitoring for the rest of my life. My liver function returned to near normal, though I could never drink alcohol again. My kidneys recovered completely, a miracle considering how close they'd come to complete failure. Physical therapy helped me regain my strength. The months of poisoning and bed rest had atrophied my muscles, and learning to walk steadily again was humbling. But every step I took was a victory, a defiance of Mark's attempt to put me in the ground. The physical therapist, a former Marine named James, pushed me hard, but understood when I needed to cry through the exercises. The emotional healing was harder than the physical recovery. I started seeing a therapist who specialized in betrayal trauma and attempted homicide survivors, a niche specialty I never knew existed. Dr. Brennan helped me understand that the mark of a successful psychological manipulation was making the victim doubt their own instincts, which is exactly what Mark had done. We worked through my guilt over not seeing the signs sooner, though Dr. Brennan reminded me that I had seen them. I'd noticed the receipts, the perfume, the strange behavior. Mark had just been skilled at explaining them away, using my trust in him as a weapon against me. The therapy sessions were brutal, forcing me to confront not just what Mark had done, but why I'd been susceptible to his manipulation. I joined a support group for women who'd survived attempted murder by intimate partners. The stories were horrifyingly similar. Husbands who'd taken out insurance policies, boyfriends who'd staged accidents, partners who'd poisoned slowly and methodically. We met every Thursday evening in a church basement, sharing our stories and our strength. One woman, Patricia, had survived being pushed off a cliff by her husband of 30 years. Another, Diane, had discovered her boyfriend was putting mercury in her protein shakes. Each story was a testament to the evil that could hide behind a loving face, but also to the strength of women who refused to die quietly. My business slowly came back to life. Catherine had held things together as best she could, and when I was finally strong enough to work again, she was there with client files organized and ready. The tech billionaire, whose name was Robert, became my first client during recovery. He was patient when I could only work a few hours a day, understanding when I had to reschedule due to medical appointments. The publicity from the trial had an unexpected benefit. Women who'd read about my story reached out wanting to hire me. They saw me as someone who'd survived and thrived, and they wanted that energy in their homes. My business transformed from just interior design to creating spaces of healing and empowerment. I specialized in designing homes for women starting over, whether from divorce, death, or tragedy. Sarah remained my rock through everything. She moved into my guest room, temporarily making sure I took my real medications and ate proper meals. She screened my calls, protecting me from reporters and curiosity seekers. She even helped me redecorate the master bedroom, removing every trace of Mark's presence and making it truly mine. I sold the house in Westport 6 months after the trial. Too many memories haunted those rooms, and I needed a fresh start. I bought a cottage near the ocean in Rhode Island, a place Mark had never been. The sound of waves became my meditation, the salt air a constant reminder that I was alive and free. Writing became part of my healing process. Dr. Brennan suggested I journal about my experience, but the journals turned into something more. A publisher friend of Sarah's read some of my writing and suggested I turn it into a book. The advance was substantial enough to secure my financial future independent of the divorce settlement. The book writing process was therapeutic but exhausting. Reliving each moment, analyzing each red flag I'd missed or dismissed, forced me to confront uncomfortable truths about myself. Why had I trusted so blindly? How had I allowed myself to become so isolated? The answers weren't simple, but understanding them felt crucial to ensuring I'd never be vulnerable in the same way again. My family relationships needed repair too. My parents carried enormous guilt over believing Mark's lies about my mental state. My mother cried when she learned how desperately I'd wanted to see them during those dark months. We spent long weekends together rebuilding the bonds Mark had tried to sever. My brother, who'd never liked Mark but couldn't articulate why, became fiercely protective. Dating wasn't even a consideration for the first year. The thought of trusting someone with my heart again seemed impossible. But slowly, as I healed and grew stronger, I began to open up to the possibility that not all men were Mark. Dr. Brennan helped me identify the red flags I'd missed and develop boundaries that would protect me going forward. The support group became a source of unexpected friendships. Patricia and I started meeting for coffee outside of group, comparing notes on our recovery and celebrating small victories. When Diane started dating again, we were her cheerleaders and her protective detail, meeting her new boyfriend with kind but watchful eyes. My book was published 18 months after the trial. Titled 5 Days to Freedom, it detailed not just the attempted murder, but the systematic destruction of my identity that preceded it. The book tour was terrifying at first, standing in front of strangers and telling my story. But at every stop, women approached me with their own stories of survival. 2 years after that horrible day in the ICU, I was not just surviving, but genuinely thriving. The book had become a bestseller, resonating with women around the world who'd experienced betrayal and abuse. The speaking engagements that followed took me across the country, sharing my story in venues from women's shelters to corporate conferences on domestic violence awareness. At a conference in Seattle, I was preparing for my presentation when a woman approached me hesitantly. She introduced herself as Linda Thompson, and it took me a moment to realize why the name was familiar. She had been Mark's first wife, the one he'd told me had been mentally unstable and addicted to prescription drugs, the reason their marriage had failed. Linda and I talked for 3 hours that day. The story Mark had told me about her was completely fabricated. She'd never had addiction issues or mental health problems. What she'd had were mysterious illnesses during the last year of their marriage that disappeared completely after their divorce. Stomach problems that doctors couldn't diagnose. Unexplained rashes and breathing difficulties. Chronic fatigue that left her bedridden for weeks. She'd suspected poisoning but could never prove it. Mark had been younger then, less sophisticated in his methods. When she'd tried to voice her suspicions to friends, Mark had convinced everyone she was paranoid. He'd filed for divorce, citing her mental instability, and she'd been so desperate to get away from him that she'd agreed to unfavorable terms just to be free. Linda had followed my trial obsessively, seeing her own story reflected in mine, but with the proof she'd never had. She'd considered reaching out during the trial, but didn't want to complicate the prosecution's case. Now, meeting in person, we cried together for the years we'd lost and the trust that had been shattered. That meeting led to a revelation. Linda and I started a foundation together called Survive and Thrive, dedicated to helping women recognize and escape covert abuse. We focused on the subtle signs of poisoning, financial abuse, and psychological manipulation that often precede physical violence. The foundation provided resources for women to get independent medical testing and legal advice. Through the foundation, I met Thomas. He was a widower whose wife had died of legitimate cancer, and he volunteered with us because he'd watched his wife's strength during her illness and wanted to honor her memory by helping other strong women. He was gentle and patient, understanding that I needed to move slowly. Our first coffee date took 6 months to happen. I'd canceled 3 times, paralyzed by fear each time we were supposed to meet. Thomas never pressured, simply saying he'd be ready whenever I was. When we finally sat across from each other in a small cafe, I was trembling. Thomas noticed and quietly said he understood trust was earned slowly, and he was willing to take whatever time I needed. We talked about books that day, nothing deeper. He loved mystery novels, ironically enough, and could discuss plot twists with the enthusiasm of a literature professor. He made me laugh, something I hadn't done genuinely in so long. When he walked me to my car, he shook my hand formally, making me smile at his deliberate respect for boundaries. The relationship developed at a glacial pace that would have frustrated anyone else. Thomas attended my speaking events sitting in the back and offering supportive smiles. He met Sarah and my other friends in group settings before we ever went on a real date alone. He understood why I needed to verify everything he told me, never taking offense when I admitted I'd confirmed his employment and background. 6 months into our friendship, I finally trusted him enough to share the details of what Mark had done. We were walking on the beach near my cottage when I told him about the poisoning, the betrayal, the months of torture disguised as love. Thomas listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he simply said that Mark's evil didn't define me and never would. Mark's appeal was denied on the 2-year anniversary of his conviction. He'd claimed ineffective counsel and jury bias due to media coverage. The appellate court dismissed every argument. Jennifer testified against him again during the appeal, providing even more damning details about their plan. She revealed they'd discussed doing it again once they were established in Bermuda, finding wealthy older women to marry and murder. The insurance company sued Mark for fraud and won. Every penny of his remaining assets was seized, though there wasn't much left after his legal bills. His parents had cut off all contact with him. His father wrote me a letter apologizing for raising a son capable of such evil, wondering where they'd gone wrong. I wrote back telling them it wasn't their fault. Some people choose darkness despite being raised in light. My health stabilized, though I'd never be quite the same. The poisoning had aged my body in ways that couldn't be reversed. My hair grew back thinner. My energy levels never quite returned to what they'd been before. But I was alive, and every limitation was a reminder that I'd survived what was meant to kill me. The cottage by the ocean became my sanctuary. I decorated it with colors Mark had hated, filled it with books he'd never have read, and adopted 2 cats he'd never have allowed. Every choice I made was a small act of reclamation, taking back the autonomy he'd tried to steal. The master bedroom faced the ocean, and I fell asleep to the sound of waves every night. My design business evolved into something more meaningful than I'd ever imagined. I specialized in creating healing spaces for trauma survivors, understanding intuitively how environment could aid recovery. The tech billionaire Robert became not just a client, but a friend and investor, helping me expand the business to include a nonprofit arm that provided free design services to women's shelters. The speaking engagements continued, each one reaching women who needed to hear that survival was possible. I learned to recognize the look in someone's eyes that meant they were living their own version of my story. After every speech, I'd stay as long as needed, talking to these women privately, giving them resources and hope. Standing here now, 3 years after doctors gave me 5 days to live, I can finally see the complete picture of my journey. The woman who lay in that hospital bed, poisoned and betrayed, feels like a different person entirely. Not because I've forgotten her, but because I've grown far beyond what she ever imagined possible. The cottage is filled with life now. Thomas and I married in a small ceremony on the beach with Sarah as my maid of honor, and Patricia and Diane as bridesmaids. It wasn't the fairy tale wedding I'd had with Mark with hundreds of guests and elaborate decorations. It was something better, something real. 20 people who truly loved us, celebrating a union built on honest foundation. Thomas moved in, gradually respecting that this was my space first. He brought his books and his gentle presence, never trying to change what I'd created. He understood that my independence wasn't negotiable, that I needed my own bank accounts, my own car, my own ability to leave if I ever needed to. He celebrated these boundaries rather than being threatened by them. The foundation Linda and I started has helped over 500 women recognize and escape covert abuse. We've funded independent toxicology testing that revealed poisoning in dozens of cases. We've provided legal resources that helped women safely leave dangerous situations. Every success story reinforces that Linda's and my suffering had meaning if it helps others avoid the same fate. I still attend the support group every Thursday. Not because I need it the same way anymore, but because new women join regularly, terrified and broken, needing to see that recovery is possible. I've become what Patricia was, for me, proof that you can rebuild after someone tries to destroy you completely. The nightmares have mostly stopped. In the beginning, I'd wake up gasping, feeling phantom poison burning through my veins. Thomas would hold me while I shook, never asking questions, just whispering that I was safe. Now months pass between nightmares, and when they come, they're less vivid, less consuming. Mark remains in prison where he'll stay for at least 18 more years. I receive notification whenever he's moved or has a disciplinary action. He's apparently not doing well in prison, unable to charm and manipulate men who see through facades better than I ever did. There's no satisfaction in knowing he's suffering. There's just indifference, which feels like the ultimate victory. Jennifer was released on parole last month. Part of her parole conditions includes having no contact with me, staying out of Rhode Island, and regular check-ins with a parole officer. I received a letter from her through her lawyer, another apology that I didn't read past the first line. Some apologies come too late to matter, and hers is one of them. Dr. Harrison died in prison 6 months into his sentence. A heart attack, ironically. The man who'd helped poison me died of natural causes. There's poetry in that somewhere, though. I'm not interested in finding it. He was just another weak person who chose money over morality, and the world is better without him. My book has been optioned for a movie, though I'm ambivalent about seeing my story on screen. The producers promise to focus on the survival and recovery rather than the sensational aspects of the crime. They want to show other women the warning signs, the red flags that wave in plain sight if you know how to see them. I've learned to trust my instincts again. That's perhaps the greatest victory of all. Mark had made me doubt my own perception, question my own sanity. Now, when something feels wrong, I investigate rather than dismiss. When someone's words don't match their actions, I pay attention. When my gut says danger, I listen. The physical reminders of my poisoning are permanent but manageable. Monthly blood tests monitor my organ function. I take supplements to support my damaged liver. I can't process certain medications normally, so every doctor I see needs my complete history. These inconveniences are small prices for survival. Sometimes I think about the woman I was before Mark tried to kill me. She was trusting and optimistic, believing in love without reservation. I mourn her sometimes, that innocent version of myself. But I don't want to be her again. This version of me, scarred, but strong, aware, but not paranoid, careful, but not closed off, is who I was meant to become. People often ask me if I forgive Mark. The question always surprises me because forgiveness implies he deserves any space in my emotional life. I don't forgive him, and I also don't carry hatred. He's simply irrelevant to my life now, a chapter that's closed and locked away. My energy goes toward living, not toward him. The cottage garden blooms with plants that would have poisoned me if Jennifer had known about them. Foxglove, oleander, and castor bean plants grow beautiful and deadly, a deliberate choice to surround myself with danger made beautiful. Thomas worried at first, but now he understands. I'm not afraid of poison anymore. I know what it looks like, and I'll never consume it again, literally or figuratively. When women reach out after reading my book or hearing me speak, I always tell them the same thing. Trust your instincts. Those uncomfortable feelings, those moments when something seems off, those are your survival instincts trying to protect you. Don't let anyone convince you you're being paranoid or difficult. If someone truly loves you, they'll want you to feel safe, not silenced. Mark's whispered words in that hospital room, "Finally we can be free," turned out to be prophetic in a way he never intended. His attempt to kill me did set us both free. Him from the exhausting performance of being a loving husband while planning murder. Me from a marriage that was slowly poisoning me long before the actual poison entered my veins. Those 5 words sealed his fate, sending him to prison for decades. But they also sealed mine, freeing me to become someone stronger than I ever imagined possible. Every morning when I wake up beside Thomas, hearing the ocean and feeling genuinely safe, I remember that I'm living the life Mark tried to steal, and that more than any revenge is the ultimate victory. The lessons from my story are simple but vital. Love shouldn't require you to die for it, literally or figuratively. Someone who isolates you from family and friends isn't protecting you, they're controlling you. If your health mysteriously declines while in someone's care, get an independent medical opinion. Financial secrecy in a marriage is a red flag that should never be ignored. And most importantly, when someone shows you who they are through their actions, not their words, believe them the first time. Looking back, there were so many moments when I could have seen the truth if I hadn't been blinded by trust. The insurance policies, the secret phone calls, the mysterious illness that no other doctor could verify. But that's the insidious nature of betrayal by someone you love. They use your trust as a weapon, your love as a weakness. They count on your inability to believe someone you share a bed with could plot your death over morning coffee. But here's what Mark never understood, and what all abusers fail to grasp. The human spirit's capacity for survival is stronger than any poison, any betrayal, any attempt to destroy it. We are built to survive, to fight, to rise from ashes stronger than before. He thought he was killing a weak woman. Instead, he created a warrior. Today, as I finish writing this story for all of you watching, I want you to know that whatever battle you're fighting, whatever betrayal you're surviving, whatever poison someone is feeding you, literal or metaphorical, you can survive it. You can rise from it. You can build a life so beautiful that their attempt to destroy you becomes just a footnote in your larger story of triumph. Those 5 days the doctors gave me turned into years of life more authentic and meaningful than I ever imagined. The husband who smiled at my death sentence is behind bars while I smile at sunrises from my ocean cottage. The woman who helped poison me is struggling with parole restrictions while I'm free to go wherever I choose. The life they tried to steal from me has been replaced by something so much better that I'd almost thank them if they weren't so entirely irrelevant to my happiness now. If you're watching this and something resonates, if you recognize your own relationship in my story, please seek help. Call a domestic violence hotline, talk to a trusted friend, see a doctor independently from your partner. Don't wait for the 5-day countdown to begin. Don't let someone else's plan for your life override your own survival instinct. You deserve love that builds you up, not breaks you down. Love that celebrates your strength, not seeks to destroy it. What would you do if you discovered the person you trusted most was slowly killing you? Have you ever ignored red flags because facing the truth seemed impossible? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and please like this video if my story resonated with you. Subscribe to hear more survival stories that prove the human spirit is unbreakable, and please share this with anyone who might need to hear that survival is possible, that betrayal doesn't have to be the end of your story. Thank you for listening to my journey from victim to survivor to thriver. Remember, you are stronger than any poison, any betrayal, any attempt to silence you. Your life is yours to live, and no one else's plan for your death should ever override your determination to survive. Stay strong, trust your instincts, and never let anyone convince you that your concerns aren't valid. Your life is worth fighting for always.